We hope that you enjoyed the workshops, and welcome again here in the forum. We're really excited to have our last event of the day, our debate taking place. We talked a lot today about the financial aspects, maybe the technical aspects of the energy transition, but we didn't talk so much about the societal perspective, and it's time to do this now. And I'm really excited to have this debate, and I welcome our speakers. I welcome Sasha Nick, who is scientist here at EPFL, and who, I must also say, helped us from the organizing committee a lot in making this forum possible. And thank you very much for the speakers for being here. Sasha, I hand over to you, and let's enjoy this debate.
Thank you very much for inviting us. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate this, this little debate. We will hopefully focus on the most important topics of interest to you. How do we go from the current state of inequality in all sorts of dimensions to something much better? Both Simone and Julia are the right people to discuss this. I will not very much introduce their work, because they will do a quick introduction each on what they do. Just to link it to the previous session, we have discussed a lot about technology. We have discussed the thing that doesn't even exist, but people take it very seriously, which is money. And now we will talk about real aspects, which is how that thinking translates into human well-being, how that translates into relations of power, into the political economy, which is the area of research of Julia, and how it translates into inequalities, which is the area of research of Simone. And I have made it very quick, but let me introduce Simone to do a first quick introduction.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. So thank you very much. I really thanks to the organizers for inviting me and this beautiful place. So I'm coming from University of Pisa in Italy, and the structure, so the infrastructure is not like this one. So really good to be here tonight. And so I'm an economist. So I'm not an engineer, and in the last 10 years, maybe a bit more than 10, I focused on two issues that are inequality and climate change. Initially, there were two different streams of line, and I understood that probably we have to find a way to put them together if we want to solve the issue of the transition. So I really appreciated the discussion this afternoon. It was really great, but I think that there is something like a sort of something that is missed. And what is really missed, I think, is really how society reacts to this change. And this is not only an issue about only behavioral change, it's really about fairness. That is something that, of course, you know that economists would teach to you a lot about efficiency, but we know that fairness is important as well if we want that the society works well. And this was a bit the idea that I tried to work with in many different ways. In general, in the last period, we create a quite big model of what is called IAM, Integrated Assessment Models, and trying to evaluate the impact of policies in many different respects. So if I have to make one point, is that really the dynamics and the feedback loop that are from innovation to, firms, to work, to inequalities, are so important that we have somehow to take them together if really we want to make a transition in 15 years, as someone in the afternoon was saying. So we have to understand if the impact of what we are proposing are really able to maintain, place, work, jobs, can sustain, an improvement, a prosperity for all, or something like that. So I hope to be not too negative tonight. So the first, I have 3 slides. Okay. The first is about what I can say, a sort of social barriers, which are the real social barriers, in my opinion, to the transition, because I agree with most of the discussion today that from a technological point of view, we are almost ready to do this transition. So why so difficult? And the second one, how we can broken this kind of negative feedback or these barriers, societal barriers. And finally, I try to understand if there are some way to make the things a bit faster, let's say. So how we can make really the transition happens very soon. So starting for the first. So when you study a lot the policies, I think here mainly on to macro policies, which is the effect of these policies on the economic system. You will find that most of the things that we had in mind until now and what we apply are quite regressive. Okay? So what does it mean regressive here is that from one side, there are many inequality dimensions that can be affected, and not in the good way. And on the other side, there is also an issue of justice that is important, especially for maintaining a sort of democratic system. So I don't know, we can make a sort of game about some of the examples, but just to make one, since today we were speaking about land transport, considering, for instance, an incentive for electric cars, that is what we have in Italy now, like 6,000 euro if you sell your combustion engine, internal engine car, and you buy an electric car. Who can afford an electric car today in Italy? Only rich people. So it means that you are making this kind of contribution mainly to rich. The same is true for buildings. So in Italy, we have a big amount of money made for efficiency in buildings. That is true. So industry is quite efficient in Italy because we don't have energy, but buildings are really low efficiency. So of course, it's important to work on it. But of course, again, who made the investment and find the agreement with the firms for making this like transformation and efficiency in buildings? Mainly the rich. We have some data where almost all this money goes really to the top income, the richest people. This is a problem. Of course, for me, it's a problem because I feel the fairness is important. But maybe this is different, so there can be different opinion about that. What is important that if we are not able to grasp this issue, then people react. And what sometimes I put in these slides is the picture of Gilets jaunes. Remember what happens in France a few years ago. I mean, it was a very small increase in energy price that made people protest and make riots. Why? Not because they are against environmental policies, but because they understood that this policy was affecting people in different ways. And especially some people where, of course, they feel the regressive of this policy. So there is something more here, and this is important probably for the work that I'm doing, is that that probably is not really an issue of finding the right policy to avoid this kind of negative effect. Again, even if you're not interested about fairness, the issue is that the feedback can be really to stop the policy. What happens to Macron, that they didn't bring, then this policy was not included. But another possibility is that you try to avoid this sort of inequality filter. So when you speak about environmental policy, you also have to think about which are the social policies that can help the system to avoid the regressive effect. This means that maybe we are not only, so it's good not to only speak about, great innovation or, electric cars or sharing mobilities or whatever, but also to understand which kind of social policy can help people to afford and to take the advantage of this innovation. And this means how to reduce inequalities in our society, or at least how to give to all the people to afford this kind of consumption. And this is the consumption side. That is not the only one. What is really dramatic now is the situation on the labor market, right? So people are losing their job, not only for the transition, but of course the transition make the things changing a lot. So it is true that probably this kind of transition would make a lot of jobs in the future. But of course, if you want to make the transition available, you have to think how to protect the people that are losing the job today. And for instance, we were speaking today about automotive. In Italy, automotive is a big, dramatic situation. So because there are families that lose their job and they are at home and they are looking for unemployment benefit and so on for many years, and it's really difficult to make that. And so then trade unions start to be again, so maybe not 2030, 2035, and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's becoming that also the part that should be much more sensitive to our environmental argument start to make some doubts. Okay, start to make some conservative opinion about that. So if we want to make really progressive, to progressive, not really left or right sense, but really progressive in terms of going in that direction, I think we have to put together in the mainstream reasoning about the transition, really the issue of inequalities, how we can deal with it. And maybe for Italy, of course, this issue is really important. Maybe, I don't know, in Switzerland, maybe less. But however, I think it's an issue, okay? It's an issue. The second point is this one. I hope that it's clear enough. So there is something that maybe we can do that is a bit different from with respect to what we discussed until now. And it's this idea that maybe some of the necessity of growth, I don't want to be here, I mean, to discuss if the growth is compatible or not. I don't know if Julia will do later. We can discuss later if you want. But the point is that part of this economic growth, we have a lot of evidence that is not producing an increase of well-being or prosperity in general. Why? There are many explanations in the literature. One is really materialist. So I mean, 2 minutes, okay, I will do. So for instance, you start there is some environmental impact, and then you have to make some defense in consumption, for instance, from traffic jam, from air conditioning. So in Italy, air conditioning was never there. Now, without air conditioning, I cannot work 6 months per year. I mean, it's not really passing decades, but just a few years. But there is another part that is the social. I'm sorry, I'm going fast, and maybe we can back later if we have time. There is a sense of alienness due to the fact of how the system is working. And maybe we can think how some drivers of well-being can change and change in the transition itself. I mean, this means that people will tend to understand that maybe they can have some high level of well-being even with less income. Again, it's not really an issue about the growth here. It's an issue of making the system functioning also in some different ways. So some policies that directly goes to directional goods can be effective as many of the innovation that you are discussing. And I hope that maybe some of you have some ideas to work on this direction with social innovation that can work well. So I leave with a sort of very simple thing that is a sort of, I don't know if you know loopy is nice, I mean, especially for the people that are not really doing quantitative studies. So I mean, there is a way of speed up the process, putting together, a sort of what is called social tipping dynamics. That means to include a reinforcing feedback loop that can make the transition really fast. Not only economic cycles, not only, something innovation that can make battery adoption maybe much easier, but there is also the possibility that changing lifestyles can make the system work, and also overcome some, balancing feedback like the one on rebound that you were discussing also today. We'll stop here and maybe we discuss after.
Thank you very much, Simone. Let me suggest we move straight to the presentation by Julia, and then we have a discussion on both of them together, if that is okay.
Sure. Okay, and
try to click on the green button.
Yeah.
It doesn't do. Okay, so we need to move to the next presentation.
They're doing. This is coming.
It's coming. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so, and I'm afraid I won't have any slides as exciting as this one. This one was cool. Okay, so I just want to start with some sort of basic empirical facts around energy and inequality. And hopefully there'll be a few minutes left over to talk about the power and politics side of it, which are quite important. And we've already talked about a bit today, but I don't have in slides because you don't really attach numbers and graphs to that stuff usually. Okay, so this is just, I'm going to be presenting a lot of work that was done by Yannick Oswald, who's currently at the University of Lausanne. Oh, I should have said, Julia Steinberger, professor at the University of Lausanne, so just, a couple of metro stops over in the Faculty of Geosciences and Environment, and I do Ecological Economics. So this, I'm going to be showing some papers from the Living Well Within Limits project and from the people who did their research and PhDs within that, including Yannick Oswald, who's currently doing a postdoc at the University of Lausanne. So this was one where we basically tried to look at the inequality of energy. So what does the inequality of energy currently look like in terms of inequality of energy footprints? And basically, we found that it follows inequality of income within countries, not just between countries, but within countries, except that it's a bit more unequal. So the more unequal a country is economically, the more unequal its energy use will be within the country. the less unequal it is, the less unequal. But basically, the headline message from this is that energy inequality follows income inequality, except slightly worse. And why is it worse? And that's something that I think a lot of people with this dream of green growth thought that the wealthier people became, the more dematerialized and de-energized, the more decoupled their consumption would be. This is sadly not true. So basically what we did through this study is, and I'm going to go and stand over here because there are more people sitting there, and I hate to stand between people and some slides, also it's easier. So basically what we did is we wanted to do a two-dimensional mapping of consumption categories. And so we splatted down energy footprints and their inequality and energy intensity onto this quadrant graph. So what's happening on the horizontal axis is that you have less energy per dollar spent to the left, more energy per dollar spent in the economy to the right. And this is showing, it's really a summary of international and intranational results. Look, so it's really a globally representative result. This is what's consumed more by rich people. So the vertical dimension is consumed more by rich people at the top. This is within each country. So it's really an internationally robust result, and consumed more by poor people at the bottom. And what was really interesting, we were really interested to see what rich people, what the most energy impactful, energy intensive consumption, so it's luxury and high intensity consumption would exist. So what are rich people doing that is so bad for the environment? And it turned out to be remarkably simple. We didn't have really an a priori looking at going into it, but the data was really clear. All the things, all the consumption categories in this quadrant of luxury and high intensity are transportation categories, and every transportation category is also in this quadrant. So basically, rich people buy bigger cars, drive them for longer distances, take more frequent trips, same for flying, etc. So basically, the inequality also exists for public transportation categories. So, and in contrast, heat and electricity, which is energy use in buildings, is something that is much more equally distributed. This is something that it's overconsumed by poor people. That means it's disproportionately a large share of their budget. Poor people do not want to be spending that money. They do not want to be, it is not a choice of poor households to be consuming this heat and electricity. It is something they're obliged to do in order to have decent levels of comfort, right? Basically decent living standards. And so, so this means that you also need wildly different policy. The car thing is not, the car and transportation thing is not something you're going to green grow your way out of, okay? It's just something that richer households do. So you need to tax and regulate it, whereas for heat and electricity in buildings, you need to invest in energy efficiency, and you need to invest in low carbon generation, because the households who are most impacted by this do not have the resources to invest in it themselves. So that's sort of the first kind of result. So this now is a result, it's the last paper from Marta Baltrushevit's PhD. She published beautiful papers on energy household footprints in Zambia, Nepal, and Vietnam, and I really recommend that you look at those because there's a lot of information on inequality and well-being that will blow your minds if you are not familiar with what happens in developing countries. For instance, the fact that households use less energy, less residential energy per capita as their income goes up because they can afford electricity. So crazy stuff like that, okay? But here we're in the UK, and so here we have the 10th the decile of richest people in the UK, the decile of the poorest people in the UK, and the UK is bonkers, right? Like, we know this, but you can really see it here. Look how, the bar length is energy footprint in gigajoules per capita. And look at housing. Housing is incredibly equal. So it's the same kind of thing I showed you on the previous plot, right? And then you have flights and car use, which is where you really see the inequality exploding. And the inequality is so huge that the flights of the richest decile are more than the total energy use of the 20% poorest people. And we haven't done it for Switzerland. I think Switzerland would look slightly different, but overall the pattern basically is the same in country after country. okay, then the question becomes, what happens if we redistribute things? And there's this idea that, oh, we can't have equality because then those dirty, poor people will consume stuff and it's going to destroy the planet. And so we decided to check this, right? And so what we basically did, this was the second paper from Yannick Oswald's PhD, is we decided to do a global thought experiment, and that's what the paper's called, to redistribute income. We were just like, we take all the dollars in the world in a big pile, and then we either spread them out more equally, or we spread them out more unequally. And these are the simulations we run, right? So this is very equal, and then by the time you spread it out, it's very unequal, but we're keeping the amount of dollars the same total. And the headline result is that energy changes very little, total. If all you do is redistribute income, the amount of energy used overall globally changes very little. If you make the world very unequal, it goes down by a few percent. If you make it very equal, it goes down, up by a few percent. But overall, there's less than a 10% change, which does not make this a significant factor. So it's really so that is not what's really changing things. What changes massively is who gets to use it. So here we show, so there's two things going on here, and I didn't include them, the legend, so you're just gonna have to trust me. So this is the percent of the global population, oh no, it is. The percent of the global the blue thing is the percent of the global population below decent living energy. And you can see that we can get that pretty much close to zero by making the world more equal. If we make it more unequal, we basically have a large percent of the world that is below decent living energy. And you can have also the percentage of mega consumers. You can eliminate mega consumers altogether, or you can have them be a larger percent of the population. And what really changes in terms of energy inequality when you do redistribute income is how energy is used. So a more unequal world, a very unequal world, will use a lot more transport, which is this pink category, and less housing. A more equal world will use less transport and more housing. And since since housing actually is fairly easy to decarbonize, at least technically, that means that a more equal world might actually be good. We also did some other stuff. We did some modeling. Where we tried to model not just looking at keeping energy systems the same, but looking at distributing equal energy services with very efficient technologies. So efficient but realizable technologies, unlike negative emissions, right? What we found is that would require less than half of current energy use by 2050. So that's what this plot is showing. You have the international energy scenarios, and our scenario, which is really extreme. You have full equality of access to really efficient energy services. But this is well above poverty, it should be noted. And that's less than half of current energy use. And I think that was that. How many minutes do I have left, Sasha? 0?
30 seconds left.
30 seconds left. The biggest obstacles to this are power and inequality. So basically, if we want to square the circle globally of realizing human aspirations and eliminating poverty, as well as reducing emissions, what we really need is to reduce inequality a lot. And that requires facing very, very powerful entrenched industries that basically run our societies, see Switzerland and the automotive and road industry, and so on. So basically, we're facing a political challenge, and because we're facing a political challenge or a political economy challenge, we really have to understand how these industries operate in order to be able to achieve something closer to livability. And that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you both for this wonderful introduction. Let's get this one dark so we focus on our discussion now. I will direct a question to one of you, but the idea is not a long reply, but rather a short reply in the discussion. So hopefully we will all say something on each topic. So first of all, we saw that inequalities, Simone, we saw that inequalities are a big obstacle because it would any kind of environmental action, sustainability action creates even more limitations, even more hardship, etc. Now, if you look at your system dynamics map, the one you showed at the end, how do we create a positive feedback loop that starts from the inequality as a driver of indignation, or as a driver of awareness, or as a driver of societal change, and that it translates into reinforced policy, reinforced investment into what we need to do, less investment or no investment to the things we don't need to do, etc. How to use this inequality, which is an obstacle today, and make it into a driver of something positive?
I mean, again, I try to be 1 minute answer, but so in my opinion, the most interesting issue is that, again, don't think about inequality only in terms of income. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, one policy that I think we discussed strongly in our, let's say in the post-growth environment is work inter reduction. Work inter reduction is a way of redistributing work, even at least labor income, but of course also time. No? And this is something that maybe can allow people to have less status competition, for instance, because less inequality means that maybe you can, instead of buying a very big car also for status quo, or for a status, no? You can maybe think that the difference between consumption of people is less important. And this can drive part of the change and, try to foster a bit this kind of transition. But I don't want to say that all the transition policies are regressive. This is a bit what happens until now, in my opinion. Of course, is really our idea. So the point is really how we can make policies for the transition a driver of reducing inequality, for instance. That is something that probably is another interesting question. But however, I think reducing inequality is really something that we have to do also, because at the global level, it is something that, of course, is not sustainable, maybe. So when I teach development economics, it's something that maybe in middle age you can sustain, but of course the inequality that we have today are not ethically sustainable.
Julie, would you like to add something? I think it's really interesting because I think that there's a bigger point about sort of the narrative of the current economic system that really associates economic security with consumption, with consumption that is very often driven by industrial creation of dependency on products, including car dependency, obviously being the biggest example. And I think that one of the things that these policies could do in terms of demonstrating that they're reducing inequality is basically providing an example of a society and an economy that provides freedom from consumption. So one of the things that you're trying to do is you're basically allowing people to live good lives where they can have life plans and do pretty much anything they want without having to depend on resource use and constant interactions with the market, where they have to pay for stuff all the time. I mean, if you look at cars, people pay for cars like at least 5 or 6 times over in our societies, through taxes, through subsidies, through petrol, through finance, through whatever. And so that the providing a vision of a world where you don't have to do this, I think might be very positive in terms of addressing the inequality issue. But it requires maybe a lot of imagination, because it's not at all what's currently usual.
Can I add one short thing? Sure, please. So, for instance, the issue why we discussed today about land transportation is really the needs of mobility. Okay, so how to cover needs of mobility for maybe a big plan of public transport. That is an increase in investment in public transport can make a bit a reduction of inequality, because the necessity of, do you remember the graph that Julia was presenting, that the increase in expenditure in mobility increases if the society is more unequal. So maybe if you think about to cover these needs through public transport, so maybe you have also a reduction of inequality itself, because probably people feel that they need a higher level of mobility with respect to what they have. Just to make a bit more concrete.
Right, absolutely. Let me build on different types of inequalities. And we have inequality of access to health or living in a healthy environment. We have inequality of access to space, to food, to all sorts of things. What would be the most effective way to think about reducing that? Is it by simply keeping everything in the market and reducing inequality of income so everybody has the same amount of money and can buy things on the free market? Or is it actually by directly rationing the things that we care about, such as space, mobility, health services, education, whatever we care about, food?
Okay, okay. Well, I think that I think that rationing has a bit of a bad reputation. So I just like to remind everybody, because Sasha went there and used the word, that rationing, for instance, food rationing in the UK, which was wildly unpopular. If you were the generation of my parents-in-law in the UK, they remember rationing. My mother-in-law didn't have a real egg until she was in her 20s. It was all egg powder, and she never liked real eggs. So people have this sort of memory of it. That's sort of like, wow, that was tough. But life expectancy went up, and health standards went up because for the first time, poor people had enough to eat. And so I think that that's just a thing to remember, is that in every single society in the world right now, there are people in food insecurity, and there are people in all kinds of economic insecurity that would benefit from rationing. And so I think that in terms of equality, providing, if we start from the position that everybody should have enough to live, to have a decent life, then that means that we should be providing a certain level for free anyway, because it shouldn't be something that people can fail to get through the market. And so one of the proposals here is universal basic services. And universal basic services would basically say, okay, everybody has a minimum that they can have access to, and our society engages itself in providing that. And you can make things very efficient that way. You can make things very cost efficient, because you're not going through lots of paperwork. You can make, for instance, housing retrofit very efficient, because you're just doing it for everybody all the time. You're not going one household at a time, et cetera. So when you're doing this kind of universal provision, things actually improve for a larger proportion of the population than you might think. They improve for everybody because nobody's in insecurity, nobody has to be afraid. And they also can reduce resource use and provide economies of scale quite significantly.
Just to add something, but I really agree with Julia. That I mean, sometimes we believe that the progress and freedom are really connected. No? So for instance, the first time that I invited to my home one US citizens, I was really, so when I understood that in my house in Italy, almost all the residents is 3 kilowatt, no? The contract with electricity seems like a sort of, no, this, I cannot lie, I live, no, in a situation where I have only 3 kilowatt, I need to consume. But it's not something where I really feel that I'm not free, no? The same is true for regulation about entrance in cities, maybe for transportation. So I mean, this is something that if you experience, it's not really something that change, no? The satisfaction, let's say, no? Or your lifestyle, so you can do very nice thing, even if there are some constraints, let's say. Okay, and this is probably something that we have to think about it, but it's a bit more, too much philosophical for me, but still an economist, let's say. So, but it's an ethical question that I think is important. I mean,
well, the problem with relative consumption is that if you live in the Château de Versailles and then you move to one room less, then you feel extremely constrained, because it's just a matter of reference. Exactly. If we think of models of changing society, this is really a question for both of you. If we want to move somehow from the society we have, of course, we need to have some kind of model of change in our mind. So like a model of equality, model of sharing, model of community, model of there could be all sorts of models. We could link that perhaps to worldviews, such as a modern or postmodern or integrative or whatever worldview. So how could we actually link these worldviews to aspects of the transition? What would, for example, what would be the first quick wins if we look into, if we have different worldviews as a basis? What would be the way to scale? What would be the way to communicate about these things? What I'm trying to get to is, do we somehow need to imagine both a worldview and all the elements of a transition that go with it? Or can we have all of these things to coexist?
I can make a short answer and then you say something more. So I have a...
Was this wrong, Julia?
No, I mean, it's difficult. I mean,
exactly, yeah.
And I'm also an evolutionary economist. No? So the idea is that really these worldviews are going together with technologies and institutions. Okay?
Right.
What does it mean? Well, it seems that the system can evolve. So if you have certain worldviews, then of course institution and technology are selected in an evolutionary framework to maximize the efficiency, or something like that. What does it mean? It means that now we develop, so this is really our father of ecological economics that was saying something like that. So we developed an idea about what Kenneth Boulding, one of the father of ecological economics, says that you are in a cowboy economy, no? Mm-hmm. So a situation in which the land is, you can find any resources, so you have no constraint. And now we are moving in a space-shape economy where everything is scarce, and it's absolutely scarce. And of course, which is the problem, is that the problem of maladaptation of this kind of worldviews. So the worldviews that we developed are not really adaptive to the situation that we have today. And this, I think, is really important because even when we discuss about the ecological transition, we are assuming that we have not to change the worldviews, but we are assuming to do as a smooth project. In a situation in which you imagine also one place like this, one like Lausanne, that is really high, but think about this society with zero emission. For sure is another world where the things are to change, institutions, technologies, worldviews. And so I think that one of the impediments that we have really today to find some nice solution in a very short period of time is really the idea that we hope to do it without changing anything in the society. While, of course, the change will be really incredibly important also in terms of power relationship, for instance. Mm-hmm. So we have to be, strong enough to imagine something different and maybe to experiment something different in order to have something that fit better, so the same like worldviews that we have 2 centuries ago, let's say, something like that.
That was a complicated question, Sasha. So I think one of the ways that I try to think about it is that we have to change an era, right? So if we succeed, it's because we'll have succeeded in changing pretty much everything. And there is a very beautiful ecological economist called Manfred Max Neef, who had this idea, this framework around human need satisfaction. And he basically had these human needs, and then he was like, but the human needs are not the only thing. There's also the way that you have a strategy for realizing them, for satisfying them. You can have multiple different strategies to satisfy the same human need. And different societies and different cultures or communities are characterized by different ways. And he had 4 families of ways that you can satisfy human needs: being, having, doing, and interacting. And of course, we're in a consumer society, so we think about interaction through the market, we think about ownership, so we're very much in the having direction. But 200 years ago, actually, or 300 years ago, or even further, we were very much in a being way. So how you were born into society determined your life chances. Who you were as a social class determined your life chances. And people were a certain social class, and they did not move from there, and so what you were determined everything. Now it's what we can buy, and I think that we're actually moving through Max Neef's strategies, and the next stage that we need to be thinking about is acting. So people have been made into passive consumers. When you give people the chance to think and reflect on where they want their societies to go, you change your system completely. So if you look at what happened in the citizen assemblies, including the Citizen Assembly on Climate in France, les 150, they refused to be demobilized. These people, it was a life-changing experience for them. And they were like, yeah, this is me from now on. The government back home won't take these things on board. Well, we will keep going and keep mobilizing for this. And so this is something that I think is really a capacity in our societies, that when people are informed and have this capacity to decide together that they really want to do things very differently. So I think one of the ideas that we need to take forward is this idea also of economic democracy, which is, do we have the right to make decisions in our economies? Right now, we can elect politicians and we can vote in Switzerland, but I can't decide, we don't have the power as citizens of Switzerland to decide whether or not we want major corporations to exist. Trafigura, Glencore, Vitol, just to name a few of them, whether we want to be hubs of petroleum and coal trading. We don't have the right to determine the supply chains that exist in our economy. And that's something that we should have in a real democracy. So I think that this idea of becoming much more active, engaged actors is part of that worldview.
Thank you very much. Very, very, very simple answer to a complicated question.
Too simple.
Of course.
Of course, the solution is not a technology or a method. The solution is a different way of thinking. The biggest machine we need to change is not some photovoltaic or some energy conversion technology. It's the machine we have in our heads. And of course, if we think of transport, the biggest source of luxury, high-intensity emissions, people can't even imagine a society without cars. They imagine a society with different cars, but they can't really imagine one without cars. Or how to imagine a society with a lot less transport. So, which brings me to the question also to both of you. How do we actually start engaging people on this? Can we start engaging people? You can't just tell people, please have imagination. We have a school system that is doing its best to make it harder for kids to imagine anything. It works fine when they are 5, when they are 10 they have less imagination. By 15 none is left. Could we somehow engage people on well-being? Could we engage people on health? Could we engage people on community? Could we somehow start a dialogue about these things? People may not care about climate or biodiversity, they may not understand enough about that. But could we start this dialogue about things that are much closer, community, health, well-being, or anything else you could add? In whichever order you wish.
No, I don't know, I was like Julia.
I think that's certainly a promising direction. I think that a lot of these aspects have co-benefits, and I was involved in the last IPCC round in Working Group 3. One thing we're missing a special report on health. Apparently we won't get one. We're only going to get a special report on cities, I think, which is slightly disappointing, to be honest. But we really need to bring in the health perspective, because we've been treating climate mitigation as and adaptation as an economic and technological problem, but the health consequences of different strategies are really important, and people really care about health. They care more about their health than they do about sort of abstract economic considerations. So I think that there are really a lot of co-benefits and a lot more information than people have. There's a lot of research out there that we were not able to include just because that wasn't the focus of the report, and that makes me very sad. Because I think it's really stuff that needs to be known and discussed much more prominently. For me, I'm always a negatively oriented person, so I know that the positive stuff exists, but I really think that people would be motivated to change more if they hated the industries that are doing this crap more, because there is a lot of stuff to dislike there. We have proof that the fossil fuel companies had better climate models in the 80s and 90s than the IPCC did, okay? And they lied a lot, and they're still doing it. And we have proof that the automotive industry has also been manipulating our governments, killing, something like 8 million people a year are killed by pollution, atmospheric pollution, a lot of which comes from the automotive industry that they know about. And they have known for decades, okay? So I think that there's a lot more that we could do to also make people much more upset with the current way of doing things. So I think that there's a push-pull thing. I think that maybe people can be pulled by a positive vision, but also we need to be doing a lot more to counter industrial disinformation and give our fellow citizens the means to decide if they really want to be allied with these industries or not. There's an example of a Swiss NGO on tobacco prevention. They try to go around convincing teenagers not to smoke, and they have some experience with this. The only thing that really works is explaining to teenagers that the industry is doing everything to get them to smoke even though they know it's going to kill them. That's the thing that makes teenagers go, oh, fuck no, I'm not going to help with these people out, right? So we need other reactions along those lines from the rest of the population, I think.
I mean, shortly, I think another important driver is about the education system. And what we learn, I mean, I'm not really an expert, but at a certain point we try to make a game about this systemic relationship between I mean, climate change, or if you want, the use of fossil fuels and societal goals. And it's much easier to make them understand a sort of system thinking. And I think this kind of, I mean, in changing the way in which the families and also people that are not involved in activism or movement, or I mean, universities, let's say, can do, is really through some kind of new educational system where the issues that I don't know, in Switzerland I think the same. In Italy there are tons of training or small educational about environmental issue, but the point is always you remember to switch off the light when you exit, close the water because it's important. That of course are important, but it's sort of making, so again, it's the idea that you can make everything with very few change in your life. Well, if you understand how the things are related, then maybe, so the discussion is much more, maybe the next time in the demonstration, they will be with us. I mean, like Fridays for Future teach to all of us in the last decade. So I think that this is part of the story. I mean, to make also children to, not really, we don't have the time to wait for them, but of course they can be really, I mean, effective with their parents, let's say. This is what I really think.
I will slowly open to questions from the audience, but while you're thinking about your questions, I have one more question for Julia and for Simone. And then you can build on this question or anything else that inspired you from all the great things that we just heard. You both work on degrowth from different perspectives. How do we actually experiment this degrowth? How do we test that at a city, at a community, at a neighborhood level, at the company level, at the local administration level? How do we find a certain number of organizations, groups of people who can test and experiment degrowth and then build on that, and those that are successful replicate them?
Julia first.
Okay. So I'll just punt the question to somebody who's not in the room, so that's easy. So within the real project that I'm part of on post-growth economies, Yorgos Kallis in Barcelona is running a research group on real existing degrowth, where they're basically looking at generally municipal level examples, sometimes country level examples of real existing degrowth, and how these organizations or these communities deal with it and find ways of doing things differently. So I would say that the research that we're learning from there, the experimentation is already happening, sometimes voluntarily, sometimes involuntarily, but we see examples of societies and industries that can degrow and that can manage it pretty well depending on their circumstances. Obviously there are examples where it doesn't go well, right? So that's another thing to learn from.
I mean, I think nice experimentation is about work time reduction. I mean, that is one of the points that we discussed. So again, so maybe some of you are not really aware of what we are discussing inside this big and different community about the growth, but it's not like reducing GDP. It's like at least understand that GDP is not really, I mean, a measure of well-being. Maybe it can be a measure of material well-being, but not really a measure of prosperity, let's say, for the society itself. This is, I mean, the main idea. And for instance, working time reduction works because we have some experiments in UK in particular where more than 3,000 workers participate to this experimentation. At the end, both firms, from one side, they want to continue this experimentation, and workers are not accepting an increasing wage to come back to the full time, let's say. So this means that there are some issues that probably at the beginning are a bit, can be frustrating. But then you find that maybe you have more time, you can make some social relationship, not only in work, but also in different places, and maybe this can really sustain your, I mean, your well-being, and maybe much more than maybe having some money for making more consumption at the end of the week. And this, I think, is something that really can be done and can help. The issue is, from one side, how to make this kind of change, be it spread away.
Yeah, how do you go from 3,000 workers to 300,000 and 30 million?
Exactly. And the time that we have, this is not much. And, but I don't know.
I hope with all of this you're inspired to ask questions. There's our usual beautiful box microphone on anything related to human well-being, degrowing, equality, inequality. Please.
Right, I've got a question for the panel. I mean, you've alluded to the fact the present economic model is essentially infinite growth on a finite planet. What do you think would happen if tomorrow you woke up and you looked at the New Scientist or the Financial Times and they said that nuclear fusion has been solved, that energy is now free, you have limitless access to energy? What do you think what impact that would have on society at large? My personal opinion is it would be terrible, but what's your opinion?
I would agree, but I'll let Simone and Julia respond.
Okay, I think at least 70% of the ecological economics community would say that it would be a drama, because of course, I mean, the issue is not only climate change, it's not global warming. So what we can do if we have, I mean, infinite amount of energy, I really, it's a word that I don't like, I mean. And then someone today was saying clearly, that this is something that maybe in 100 years can do something, but probably it's not really how we can take the problem now. But I really think that the issue is how to use the energy that we need in order to do what we really need. So me, neither Julia, we speak about the planetary boundaries issue, but probably you are aware of the studies about particularly Stockholm Institute, Restrom and others, and we know that we are out from many different indicators rather than only global warming, and it is really something that, of course, if you have a lot of energy, probably the damage that we are able to do are much, are probably more than what we can do today. And this is my answer. I don't know.
I think that part of the way I would answer that is that I think that part of the point is that we don't we're already in a circumstance where we have more than enough for everybody's needs, for everybody to live a decent life. We have more than enough food. We have more than enough energy. We're using energy in an incredibly stupid way. I mean, the internal combustion engine is so stupidly wasteful. It is an evil clown technology, okay? Like, it is, from an energy systems perspective, it's moronic, right? But we're still using it. So we can use energy a lot more. So we're not currently in a scarcity situation at all. We're in a really stupid use situation, which is pushed by industries that want us to use their products really stupidly. And we're in a very unequal distribution situation. So the challenges are very much efficiency and being less stupid at the use phase, so looking at taking demand much more seriously, and also taking underconsumption and overconsumption much more seriously. But this idea that we're in a supply-constrained world, that's wrong. That's just not true pretty much for anything that we're looking at in terms of either food or energy.
If I can very briefly comment, better technology is not good or bad per se. Technology is an accelerator of things we do. As we are going in the wrong direction as a society, going faster in the wrong direction is not better. So the immediate effect of unlimited fusion energy, assuming it could be scaled to the whole world very quickly, would be much faster growth and inequality. The next thing, the thing that would probably happen would be much bigger extraction of natural resources. So we would not all die from crossing the climate planetary boundary. We would all die much faster from crossing the biodiversity planetary boundary. Is that better? Other questions?
Yeah, me. A question for Julia. In your matrix where you put most consumed by poor people, by rich people, and then the dollars per, energy per dollars, I think. How come is food really on the poor people consume it more than rich people?
Yeah. So food is, so I should have explained in that plot, rich people consume more of everything, right? It's a question of proportion in the budget. So the things that are in the lower half of the graph take up more space in a poor household's budget. The things that were above take up more space in a rich person's budget. So it's a question of proportionality. That's the first thing. The reason that food was low energy intensity is because we're just looking at technical energy, and the food system has massive climate and environmental problems, including, I think most of the planetary boundaries are actually linked to the food system. But in technical energy terms, it doesn't show up very much because it just doesn't use that. So in other things, the environmental impact on other metrics for the food system would be much higher. Good question. Thank you.
Hello. The question that I had is, what would be the investment needed in terms of energy or dollars to achieve the perfect equality or the minimum for everyone?
What would be the
what would
if
be,
I understood
be
the
the
question,
investment needed to reach perfect equality?
Well, I mean, honestly, it would be enough to do some redistribution, let's say. So you don't need more money. Now, of course, I mean, this is a political issue, but in terms of resources, of course, you can say that taxation is not progressive at all. So in Italy, we have also in the Constitution, I mean, progressive taxation as one of the, so you can do many things. I mean, so remember, you can think a basic income program, and we have the resources for doing that if you tax some people. Of course, there is a big issue, is the scale, no? So in the sense that at the national level, it's almost impossible for the issue about capital mobility and many other stuff. But of course, I mean, it's not something that in principle, again, so this is also something why I think putting inequality inside this energy transition. So if you engineers want to convince me that we can live in a zero emission from a technological point of view, please let me say that we can live in a society with very little inequalities, because we can do it. I mean, no. So I don't start to imagine a world much different from the ones that is sustainable from a technical point of view, let's say.
There was one paper I would have wanted to share had I been allowed one more slide, and that's a paper by Jarmo Kikstra, so Kikstra. In 2021, he published a paper on the investment necessary in energy terms for decent living energy, for universal decent living energy. And what he found, so this is, and the estimate is in biophysical terms and energy terms, not in monetary terms. And he estimated it to be roughly 300 exajoules to provide efficient and sufficient infrastructure for everybody, for transport, mobility, et cetera, for housing, mobility, and health, and so on, all over the world. Now, that's a bit more than half, or roughly half of our annual energy use globally. So it's not nothing. It's a fair chunk. But this would be spread over several years, and it would allow us then universally to use about 160 exajoules for everybody to satisfy their human needs all the time. And one of the things that's dramatic in his model, because he divides it sectorally, is he demonstrates that the housing sector, buildings, are the area that require the most investment in terms of to make them efficient and sufficient. Yeah. So that's I think that was a really beautiful paper.
One more question from the audience, and then I will have a question to you. Please.
Hello, I have a question about degrowth. Usually, degrowth is badly seen because it's linked to economic crisis, and I was wondering what is the difference between unwanted degrowth and wanted degrowth in terms of output?
Yeah. Okay. All right, so degrowth is not crisis. So the whole point of degrowth is to try to de-link our current economic system from growth imperatives or growth dependencies. So the reason that lack of growth or becomes a recession, becomes a crisis, is our current economic system has structures in it that tie good things that we rely on to economic growth. And so basically we need to figure out what those are, and there are policies to remove them. So things like a social minimum that everybody has access to so that people don't fall into economic insecurity. Things like job guarantee programs so that people, one of the things that we know, by the way, and is that we need some sectors to degrow to nothing, and we need other sectors to balloon and grow tremendously, right? And so we're talking about a period of great upheaval in our economies anyway. Whether that results in overall degrowth or overall growth, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But we need that upheaval to be managed in such a way that people can make it through. And that means getting rid of growth dependencies anyway. So it's much more, so degrowth is much more about growth-proofing our economies and growth-proofing our societies, and basically saying we need societies where people are okay and we're able to function whether or not we're growing, because this growth dependency is really making us all be in a reasonable amount of danger.
Allow me to, thank you very much, Julia and Simone. Allow me to ask you a question, and whoever wants to answer, perhaps more than one of you, but briefly. And of course, the question is about what is the purpose of society? Why do we have a society? Today we don't really have an explicit goal of society. We have an implicit goal, which is the stated goal is, of course, growth. Growth of the economy, growth of companies, growth of earnings per share, and all these other things. But that in itself is, of course, just a front. It's a bit fake because money in itself is just virtual. So what that really means, the real goal that is behind that, is to make sure that people who are powerful become even more powerful. And that is then called growth, and of course everything that is behind that. So my question for you is, if you want to change that, before we change it by replacing one goal by another, we should have some kind of debate in society to get people to think about that and to develop their own thoughts. Does anybody have an idea how to start such a debate of society? Debate of society on goals, objectives, values, and of course, yes. Andrea, go ahead.
Thank you. All right. I always wanted to use this thing. No, I just wanted to say something simple. I think that when we started this conversation, I just thought about like taking care of each other and leaves no one behind, human and non-human alike. I think that would be like a first step towards creating a more equal society.
Any idea how we start this dialogue?
I think it's about inclusion. I think we should be all much more connected to one another and live in a more organic society with a simpler lifestyle in a way. And also I wanted to bring something about what was your position on the food production system, but we'll keep it in a separate question later on. But yeah, I think like leave no one behind and just taking care of each other and be more empathetic in the time being.
Would anybody, thank you very much, and would anybody like to add something? We are getting slowly to a close. We have two hands. So the two of you, and then you will have the closing word.
Thank you. Thank you for the talk and the discussion. Yeah, an idea to start the dialogue is kind of what happened in France with the Convention citoyenne du climat, where we just gather a lot of people and talk all together. And it seems like, as someone said before here, if we have really include a lot of people and everyone gets to share their ideas, it seems that, and once they start to talk, it seems like everyone can share good ideas and people are more careful about how to spend the resources we have and our time and our well-being. Wow.
Okay, thank you very much. So basically just get people in good conditions so they can talk to each other instead of consuming or doing something else. Okay?
Hello, thank you. My idea was maybe to ask to the people, okay, what do you want for your children? Because I think if we organize a debate around, okay, if we all agree on the fact that we want a better world for our children, how we can construct that. Okay, what do we want more? Maybe more freedom, more equality, less war, less pollution, and how we can act now to create a better world for our children. Maybe that's a better world, I don't know.
Thank you very much. Okay,
That's just as well.
the last intervention, so we can finish more or less on time. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I'm afraid my response to your question is going to be rather a cynical one, is that I don't think there's been any major change in society without war or revolution. That's it. Sorry, guys.
I hope we can avoid that, but I must say I somehow liked more the other three interventions, focusing on connection, getting conditions for dialogue, and asking what we want for our children. Okay, really the last one.
Very fast to reply to his answer, maybe we should get rid of some people leading the world right now to avoid having to get to wars and conflicts to find solutions.
There was an election yesterday. One candidate was right there. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, thank you. Can we just give our panelists the final word on essential steps, inequality, sustainability, or anything else that we missed? Simone and Julia, please.
I like this idea that came out about the importance of social relationship, how to include people. I think this is something that we have to reflect. I have a picture on my head that is about a small village in the countryside of Italy, quite an internal place, where at a certain point they redo the roof of a church, and on top of the roof they start to send balls, on football balls, no? On the soccer balls down on the street, and there was no more one children around in the village, not because the children were not there, but the children are inside the home. So I think we spend a lot of time in substituting services that until a certain point of time we could do, I mean, free, but I mean just a social relationship, and maybe we substitute with bed sitting, so we are, I mean, probably me and Julia quite aware of this issue, and another form of privatizing some public good on common goods that were there. So people stop of making relationship in the square just because, I don't know, because probably they start to play with computer at home, or maybe just because privatization stuff. So this rebuilding the social relationship can be really a big contribution. And we have to think which kind of innovation can help in doing this job. That I think is a nice question for you.
Julia, would you like to add something, please?
So I think that one of the things we need to do is we need to learn from history, and we also need to learn from prehistory. And it turns out that humans are very funny animals, because we have the capacity to be very equal and collaborative and cooperative, and the feelings of shame and unfairness and rage at unfairness are very, very strong in us. That's a very universal thing, and that we have used that in our past to create very equal societies. And we are also capable of living in very unequal societies that are ruled by people with very bad interests, and we kind of do what they want because we kind of let ourselves go along with it. So we have this very sort of large range of ability to live in different societies, which is something that David Graeber and David Wengrow talked about in The Dawn of Everything. Now, if you all have spare times, and which nobody does, and the capacity of dealing with a rather wacky character, I really recommend this YouTube channel called What is Politics? I have learned a lot. And one of the things that he talks about, and that I really learned from that sort of, basically he's talking about equality and inequality and the politics of equality and inequality throughout the history of our species. And that people achieve equality without necessarily going through wars and revolutions at all, and they have in our past as well, when they have circles of solidarity. So if you have organized solidarity between bunches of people, like between the women have solidarity, between the men have solidarity, and they have sort of roughly equal ways of dealing with each other, they are able to create very equal societies. When those organizations break down and nobody is there to protect the interests of the collectivity, which is our case right now, we're very atomized basically, then equality breaks down. So equality, we are capable of equality. It's something that we really like to do, but we only do it when we are organized in circles of solidarity. And that's the only lesson that I can really take forward from our history, is that we need to organize together. When we organize together, we are completely unstoppable, and everybody is very afraid of us, and we win. And when we don't organize, then we basically have to suffer the consequences. That's life.
There's nothing I can add to this. Let's applaud Simone and Julia. Thank you very much. And before the aperitif, may I kindly invite Zero Emissions Group, who on stage, who organized the whole event. Thank you very much.
Can everyone just come in front quickly? So, yes, we're not the only ones, there are many others, but first of all, thank you very much, Julia, thank you very much, Simone and Sasha, for this interesting debate. It was really a grand finale, and thank you very much. We're really taking a lot of ideas and a lot of questions with us. Something that sticks to my head is energy inequality is more severe than income inequality. And the more I think about that, the more I'm actually shocked by this. And I think we can all go out here with some open questions and hopefully get solutions that go in the right direction. Now, we've had many panels today, many discussions, and I tried to write down some of the things that stick to my head, but probably to our head, to see what we discussed about. Now, what I find really interesting is today I realized that yes, we need to make the energy transition happen, but no, it's not easy and we need a lot of things. We've heard in the morning we need to overcome technical challenges. We talked about grid congestions. Then we heard that yes, we have to fund this transition as well. We heard about venture capital funds funding innovative startups. We also need to find solutions to material bottlenecks. We've heard about critical minerals, critical metals, we've heard about batteries, etc. Then now we heard that we have to change the way we think and maybe the way in which our machines are actually working. And there was also very good news today, good news for all of us that are interested in the energy world. And this good news is that it needs a lot of qualified people to make this energy transition happen. And that's actually pretty good news for us today. And maybe one last interesting thing that Laurent Collot, the founder of Insolite, said today. He said that maybe it needs not to be 100% correct, but maybe we need to have it 80% correct and we have to do it fast. So that was one of the key insights I got from today's conference. Now, again, we would really like to thank our amazing speakers. You did really a great job. Thank you for coming, all of you for taking the time. And I think this is worth a round of applause.
Yeah, well, most importantly, big thanks to Zero Emissions Group.
Yeah, of course.
To a fantastic team over there.
Now, another thanks to our sponsors, to SIL, to the Vice Presidency for Responsible Transformation, to E4S, and also to the Swiss Federal Office of Energy. Thank you very much for your kind support. This really was essential to making this event happen. And then also, thank you very much to you, our audience today. Thank you for coming. Thank you for engaging with us, the speakers, and everyone. It was really a pleasure to have you here. And I think we're now ready for the apéro. Thank you very much.
One more thing, sorry. 1 minute and then you can get to the apéro. I know the thing says 19, but 1920 doesn't make a difference. So I wanted to say a big thanks to this team that's lined up here. They spent 1 entire year preparing this forum, not only contacting the speakers, so looking for sponsoring, looking for the logistics, looking for communication about our events. I'm really happy how many of you showed up today. So we prepared a little something, chocolate as for the speakers, and I think they deserve a big round of applause to end this day. Thank you. Thank you. From the part of SAG.
Thank you.
If anyone is vegan, please do bring a chocolate too.
Well, I can take care of that if it's a bit bigger.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.